All right. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, 4 Secrets to an Intimate Marriage for You and Your Ministry, with Shaunti Feldhahn and Dr. Michael Sytsma. I'm Nikki Collins, the Marketing Director here at RightNow Media. At RightNow Media, our mission is to work with the global church to inspire people to love others before self and Christ above all. We bring this mission to life in 3 ways. For church and ministry leaders, we offer RightNow Media, the world's largest library of Bible study video resources. We want to come alongside you to help disciple and equip your ministry every day of the week by providing access to our streaming video library packed with over 25,000 biblical videos and study resources featuring pastors and Christian leaders like Shaunti and Michael, as well as Francis Chan, Jenny Allen, Tony Evans, Louis Giglio, and more. For Christian business leaders, we offer access to RightNow Media at work for everyone in your organization. We want to help you care for your employees, cultivate a healthy team, and inspire leaders in your company with our voluntary faith-based library. You'll find video content focused on leadership, personal development, team training, and personal care taught by Patrick Lencioni, Dr. Henry Cloud, John Acuff, Liz Bohannon, and other leadership experts. And finally, we invite you to join thousands of other Christians at one of our strategic events throughout the year, like this one, designed to help you live on mission no matter your vocation or location. God calls us to focus our lives on Him rather than on ourselves. So ultimately, whether in church, in the workplace, or at home, we want to see disciples of Jesus loving God and loving others. In the webinar today, you'll hear from Brian Mosley, president of RightNow Media. Brian's passion is to help people live out their faith in their neighborhoods, offices, schools, and homes around the world. The nearly 200 people at RightNow Media serve over 30,000 churches, ministries, and Christian business leaders with powerful video content that inspires people to action. And of course, Shaunti Feldhahn and Dr. Michael Sytsma. Shaunti is a social researcher, best-selling author, and speaker. She applies her Wall Street analyst skills to investigating eye-opening truths about relationships, both at home and in the workplace. Shaunti's authored several research-based books, including For Women Only, The Kindness Challenge, and Thriving in Love and Money. Her research has been featured on The Today Show, Family Life, Focus on the Family, The New York Times, and Cosmo. Shaunti also speaks at events around the world. And Dr. Sytsma has been working with couples since 1987 as a licensed professional counselor, a certified sex therapist, and a certified professional counseling supervisor. He's also an ordained minister and has served as a staff pastor for various churches over the years. He is currently appointed to Building Intimate Marriages, Inc. by the Wesleyan Church, where he provides marriage and sex therapy and training to other professionals. Michael also co-founded Sexual Wholeness, Inc., a Christian nonprofit dedicated to training, equipping, and certifying professionals in human sexuality. He also teaches several graduate courses each year and is a professor at several seminaries around the world. Needless to say, we're in great hands with today's webinar speakers. In a moment, I'll turn this over to Brian, Shaunti, and Michael to discuss today's topic about building an intimate marriage for you as ministry leaders and those in your care. A few housekeeping items before we jump in. Everyone's microphones are muted throughout the webinar, and you may adjust your screen to see the speakers better. If you have a question for the speakers, please use the Q&A feature within Zoom, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible near the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and everyone who signed up for today's webinar will receive a link to the recording within 24 hours after it ends. If you don't see it in your inbox, make sure to check your spam. Without further ado, I'll turn this over to Brian to kick off our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, we're excited today to have both Shaunti and Mike joining us. What experts on this topic? It's an important topic for all of us, and particularly those here in ministry, just to be thinking about the foundations of our marriage and the intimacy aspects of that. And so grateful for both of you guys to join us today. Like Nikki said, everybody, if you're listening in, please ask us questions as we're going throughout today. You go to the chat, let us know who you are, where you're coming from. Just, interact some there. We are recording this. There's gonna be a lot of great teaching headed your way. I know there's oftentimes people are saying, hey, am I going to get to see this again? And the answer is yes, you are going to get to see it again. So take notes, but know that it's coming your way through a link here in the next couple of days. So Shaunti and Mike, we're grateful for you. You guys are experts in this. We're thankful for your passion for the church and passion for men and women, and as they minister to just be the most effective that they can be. And so, I'm excited today. I'm looking forward to hearing your teaching. We've loved partnering with you guys. We're grateful to have teaching on this topic in the RightNow Media Library. And then we're looking forward today to hearing you guys teach on it and then get to interact with you about it. So I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Shaunti, I know you've got lots to share on slides, and Mike, you've got lots of great insight to share as well. And so please, you guys take it away, and I'll come back at the end and we'll do some Q&A with our audience. So thank you guys for being here today.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks. We really appreciate it. This is a great opportunity
It is. And I know both of us want to say thank you to RightNow Media for partnering with us on being able to create this resource, because it's so important, and couldn't have done it without you guys. So,
Awesome.
thank
We
you.
love it. You guys are great.
All right, cool. Well, I am going to pull up our slides. We're going to go back and forth. And Dr. Mike, you want to take it away?
It is telling me my microphone's not working. Is it?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. It was working great before, so why don't you introduce the book while I just make sure here.
Sure. So Dr. Mike and I have been working for 4 years on this project. After many of you know that I conduct social research, and for many years, often on the marriage topic. And a number of years ago, realized that this topic of physical intimacy in marriage, and just in general, our intimacy in our marriages overall, was such a huge issue. We all know it's a big issue in marriage, and that we really needed to do a research project on this, needed to do a book. And yet this is a topic that is so sacred and vulnerable. We could do damage if we got anything just slightly wrong. And Dr. Mike had been one of our main advisors on this for years. He is by far one of the most renowned sex therapists and leaders in the Christian community on this. And so we were so grateful when he was willing to partner with us. So that became the research project for this book, Secrets of Sex and Marriage. And then eventually the small group materials that we're going to be talking about today. So Mike, how's your mic?
If you tell me it's okay, it's okay. I've had to switch mics, but there's always going to be problems right at the beginning, right?
It's fine.
This small group of material is something that I am really excited about. We like to say that I've worked on it for 20 years, because 20 years ago I was pastor for small groups. And how do you get a small group to talk about such a critical subject when our culture speaks so much about it, and much of the information is inaccurate or not helpful? And how do we bring a group of people together, a group of married couples, to discuss the subject in a way that is still safe, in a way that does not push past sacred boundaries? And so after 20 years of wrestling with it, we think we've come up with something where we're talking about principles. We're asking these couples to discuss the principles, but not the sexual side of it. And that keeps it safer. And then they go home and they address it from the sexual realm. And that'll make a little bit more sense as we go through some of the material today. But we're really excited about the opportunity for couples to address such a critical subject in their marriage.
Yep. We want to make sure as we get started here that you guys know that this is based on research. So there's a lot of concern today. I've talked to a lot of women's ministry directors and marriage pastors and care pastors, for example, who just say they don't know how to tell whether something is trustworthy, and especially on this topic. And so we wanted you to know this is based on a 3-year research project that include 5,300 subjects, and it was a $120,000 investment, in part because we did nationally representative surveys. And so what we're sharing here is not our opinion, as much as it is based also on Dr. Mike's 35 years of clinical experience. But this actually is based on pretty good, rigorous data.
Yeah, data that we're really proud of, and some of the research that we've done is really groundbreaking in the field. So we're really proud of it.
Yep.
So you want to introduce the 4 things that we're going to talk about?
I do. So here's what we're going to be going through today with you. And this, as we said, this is not just so that you are given some equipping to be able to address this topic with your people, but also for those of you who are married, this may be helpful for you. And so we see 4, there's other secrets that we think are important, but for today, we're going to quickly go through 4 secrets to an intimate marriage. The first, we're going to talk about reclaiming your relationship. Second, we're going to be talking about communication. Keep that communication alive. Third, we're going to dive specifically into the physical intimacy topic. with deciphered desire, there's a lot there that we're going to try to get to. And 4, what happens to all areas of marriage and all areas of intimacy is the need to hack our heart attitudes. So we will explain these as we go. So, Dr. Mike, do you want to start with reclaim your relationship?
You know, a lot of couples come into therapy, they speak up in small groups, they address to you as pastoral leaders. One of the common questions that we'll get or concerns that's raised is, we fell in love, things were intense, they were passionate, and somewhere along the line, we kind of lost that. And we would really like to know, can we get back to some of that early passion we had for each other? Can we reignite it? Can we reclaim what we used to have? And I like to point out that scripture actually directly addresses this. In Revelation, Christ identifies himself as the groom in the story, and he's talking to his bride. And in one passage of scripture, as he's speaking to the church, he says, you know, I love what you have done in that you have stayed committed to me. You've stayed committed and endured even when it was difficult to do so. Much like many of the couples that come in, and they've honored their core commitment that I am true to you. I am not planning on leaving. And they have followed exactly what Christ is saying to his bride. But then Christ follows it up and he says, but I have this one thing against you. He says, you've lost that first love you've had. You've fallen out of the passion that you had to begin with. And much like these couples that are sitting across from you saying, you know, we don't feel that anymore. The day-to-day, the children, the work that has just kind of pulled that apart. But then Christ gives his bride a recipe that works for us today. He says, remember the heights from which you've fallen, repent, and do the works that you did at first. Remember what you did to fall in love with each other. What was the context? What were the attitudes? What were the behaviors that you did? You had a specific setting that allowed you to fall in love with each other. One of the couples I was talking with, I says, what did you do to fall in love? And they said, well, we fell in love on the trail. We did a lot of hiking together. Great. And that was the context as they would play with each other and as they would engage with each other, their love blossomed in this arena. And I said, when's the last time you guys went hiking together? Well, it was probably our honeymoon, which was 4 years ago. And, you know, that's probably not working for you. Can we repent? Which, as you know, simply means turn around, go back and do the things that you did then. So when are we going to go hiking again? And maybe we can't engage all of the things we did when we were dating, but we can identify the patterns. We can identify the core issues that we can bring forward into today. And maybe it's extending more grace. Maybe it's loving each other. Maybe it's the small gifts, whatever it is that helps you to fall in love. Remember those and repent, go back and do them again.
Often one of the things that we've found in some of our earlier research that Jeff and I found, including we did a study of the happiest marriages. What are they doing differently? And one of the things they're doing differently is literally just hanging out. Like they literally just spend a little more time together. Now, it doesn't necessarily, you know, solve the big issues, but it sure makes them easier to solve. And so this remember, repent, and do model is so simple and yet so impactful as a good starting point for how people can reclaim their relationship. There's another starting point though that I want Dr. Mike to explain though, because when he first said there's another thing we need to do, and he used a particular word, I was like, what?
Yeah, I love to encourage people to live seductively. And you're right, that word sometimes pulls people up a little bit short because we have this idea of seduction as something that's done to us, but that's not accurate. Nobody can seduce you if you don't allow it. Seduction is a two-way street. But my point is, early on when we're dating, we live very seductively with each other. We bring our best self into the relationship and we show up well, because we're always trying to invite you deeper into the relationship with me. So I want to be the person that you would want to connect with. Somewhere into marriage, we almost do a flip and it's like, well, this is what you got, deal with it. Learn to accept me for who I am. And I think, but who you were in dating is who you were as well. And so I encourage people to live seductively, not just to do seductive things. That may be valuable as well. But what does it take to live in such a way that's always invitational, that's always the kind of person that your spouse would want to be in a relationship with. You know, that works as ministry leaders. You know, we watch people initially very engaged in ministry or in church, and then they kind of lose the passion and excitement for it. And we know that we have to get them back reconnected to the vision. We have to get them doing some of the stuff again. And it works in our marriage, it works in ministry, it works in our own lives. Just that remember, repent, and do. Live in a way that is seductive and draws people to us.
Yes. So do you want to go on to number 2 secret?
I'd love to. You know,
Okay, perfect.
I like to point out, and this one is, you know, the communication piece, that when we first started talking about the book, we set in a focus group, and the editor said, just don't write an entire book to say that communication is the answer. And the 3 of us sex therapists in the room looked at each other and smiled, because we knew that's what it was. You can paint it any other way you want to, but it comes down to keeping the communication alive in a really rich way. Communication really is the key to effective marriage, to effective ministry, to just about everything we do. We found that in our research. Did you want to address the research, Shaunti?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that we found that you can actually see on the screen is when you talk about communication around specifically the physical intimacy topic. And, you know, this study is not just about the physical intimacy topic. This is, you know, how do you build an intimate marriage overall? But in this webinar, we are really digging into that one. And in this case, you can see the number. We found that people who communicated well with each other on sex issues were almost 6.5 times more likely to report that they were actually happy with the frequency of intimacy in their marriage. And that happiness with the frequency of intimacy in marriage, we found, had all sorts of marriage benefits in general. And so communication is like this pivot point. We found this in
6.4 is just a massive number.
It's huge.
And
it's huge.
when we start talking about this type of research, we get excited when there's an effect size of like 1.5. 2 is just mind blowing. To go 6.5, it just tells us that if you're going to do one thing, it's to work on the communication.
Yeah, and by the way, we found this, we mentioned this in the Unlocking an Intimate Marriage study. This was the case in money. I am quite sure that this is the case in a lot of these, a lot of the topics in marriage. We just don't talk about them as often as we think we do.
And people think they talk really well. When we ask them, how well do you do? They say, oh, we do this great. And then we do the research behind it, and we find out that actually they really don't talk about it very well. And the numbers came in, and you can see them on the screen. 73% of couples don't communicate well in issues of sexuality. I see that in my office. They come in and I start asking questions, and it happened today, just before this. The wife looked at her husband and said, all the years we've been married, I didn't know that about you. Because nobody had ever asked, and it hadn't been safe to talk about it. And so engaging in that conversation, getting the 27% who do to talk better, and those that don't to really to work on those skills. They are skills. They're things that can be learned.
Well, it's skills, and it's also helping people. And this is a huge part for those of you who are leaders, especially leaders in the church, that individually people come up to you and ask you questions or want some help or want a little bit of a shoulder to cry on, is to recognize that really, truly, they are shying away from talking about some things just because of awkwardness. And that once they actually do it, they realize, oh, you know what? I'm worried that we're going to be talking about technical issues of finances, or, you know, what we're going to do in the bedroom all the time or whatever. And it's actually, so much of it is about the hard issues under the surface. And those kinds of things are things people are usually willing to share. And it makes a difference.
Because if, for example, if a small group is talking about this and they get into the details, they're getting into sacred information that is going to do damage. And many times couples don't even do well with that in their marriage, but getting them talking about what their fears are, what their hopes are, what their vision is. Much the same in leading church. You know, as a leader, I know we can get bogged down in talking about what color the carpet needs to be. You know, what specific song needs to be sung on Sunday, that can really pull us aside to talk about the vision, to talk about hearts, to talk about what we really desire. Those kinds of conversations can open up the couple to begin to truly care for each other richly.
And not just care for each other richly, but like you just mentioned about the couple that you were just counseling a moment ago, of the I didn't know that, right? Like this sense of, how have we been married for 15 years and I didn't know this about you? Because there are so many of these aha moments that once you actually start digging into the heart, and again, not the technical details, but once you start digging into the heart, it's this incredible experience for a couple to feel so much closer of, there's this whole world inside of you that's now being opened up to me. Anyway, we don't have time to get into that, but it's
well,
huge.
She said, wait, that's a game changer for me, because they're talking about vision. And, many times she thinks that his vision is for it to be playful and to be fun, that it be a physical experience. And that is part of his vision. But as he's talking about his vision for their connecting, being about heart and being focused solely on one another, and all of a sudden, her vision shifts from just pleasing him to being with him. And that shift is massive for both of them, but it takes them digging into the heart tissues. They're not even talking about the details of what they're doing. They're talking about what the goal is and what helps them to feel truly richly connected in that intimate space with each other.
Yeah. So we should probably go on to the third one, which is one of my favorite topics. And I'm just going to tell everybody, for Dr. Mike, nothing surprised him when it came to the physical intimacy topic. Like everything surprised me, but nothing surprised him. And this one, we call it Decipher Desire. This is the third of those 4 secrets. And the essential piece of the puzzle here is to be aware that we have this idea when it comes to specifically sexual intimacy. We have this idea that the way it works, it sort of comes from what we've seen in the movies or read in a book, or nobody has a grid for how things work. And so we have this Hollywood idea that the husband and the wife, or the guy and the girl, they look at each other and there's this hunger, and they both kind of go, oh, and they start kissing, and pretty soon the clothes are off and they're in bed. Like they felt this hunger, this desire, and they did something about it. And that is one type of desire, but it turns out there's actually 2 primary types of desire, and actually a third that applies to a small number of people. And so we're going to put the slide up here just so that you can see this, because couples understanding this about their intimate life is game changing.
So the first one is the initiating type of desire, and that's what you were just describing, that where I experience this sense of hunger and I go seek it out. I think we all desire to be pursued. So there's an aspect where that just sounds good, that my spouse would want to pursue me, would find me desirable. And that is the case, as you see on the screen. About 58% of husbands identify that type of desire, and about a quarter of wives identify that type of desire. But we have this massive group of people that experience more of a receptive type of desire. Receptive type of desire almost works in the reverse, that arousal needs to happen first, and then we need to be aware of the arousal, and we need to view the arousal positively. Then the desire turns on. So what that might look like in a stereotypical kind of a couple is the husband with the initiating desire looks over at his wife and goes, wink, wink, hey, you want to mess around? It'd be fun to connect. And she goes, well, yeah, it's been a few days. If I can get these tasks done, I probably still have enough energy for that. And he's already a little hurt because he wanted her to have that initiating desire. He wanted her to be thinking about it all day long, like he's been thinking about it. But hers works a little differently. And they began to engage because it's the right thing to do and it's who she wants to be. And then her body starts to warm up and her heart starts to warm up as she realizes he's attending to her, and she views that positively. And then the desire clicks on. And I had a couple yesterday. He said, in the midst of it, she goes, "We should do this more often." And he's like, "What happened to that? We should do it more often the next day." When, well, when she's aroused and she's aware, then the desire is turned on. That's a receptive type of desire. It comes in as a kind of the second step to this process. And when we started teaching on this over 20 years ago, we had a number of men, especially men 50, 55 years old, start to go, "Wait, that's me now." When I was younger, it was very clearly the initiating desire. Now it's more receptive desire as well. And we like to point out both of these are very normal, healthy types of desire.
And
The third type of go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, for one of the things that we have seen, like Dr. Mike said, he's been talking about this for 20 years, and we actually used some of his material in our For Women Only and For Men Only books and studies on this topic. And yet, just in the last few years, since we've been quantifying it for this study and we've been sharing it from the stage, as we do, like as Jeff and I do marriage conferences, you see point blank this incredible difference that it makes to whoever is the initiating partner, which, you know, statistically, you can see the numbers here. It's usually the husband, but not always, right? Sometimes it is the wife. Whoever is the initiating spouse, it's this, oh my gosh, like I've been taking this so personally, like that they didn't desire me, and instead realizing, no, they feel desire in the reverse order and they decide to get engaged first. That is life-changing for people.
Right.
So anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dr. Mike. I
No,
know you wanted to talk
we
about
can go.
desire.
I can talk about this for a very long time, as you know, and we've got an entire chapter on it in Secrets of Sex and Marriage, and we spend quite a bit of time in Unlocking an Intimate Marriage addressing this. Now,
Yeah.
we address it in the small groups by saying, talk about a food or an activity that you have an initiating desire for. Talk about a food or an activity you have receptive desire for. Do not talk about the sexual side of it until you get home with just your spouse to keep it safer. But it is important for couples to recognize it. Then there's a small group of people, as you can see, that have a resistant desire. Many times we think our spouse is resistant desire, but they just have a receptive desire. And we haven't figured out how to be seductive and engage that receptive desire on their part. And we spend time in the book and in the material teaching on that. But we think the first task in desire is to understand those differences. I think the second is, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna tell people, this is one of my favorite things for people to be aware. And this helps, and this, by the way, will help you as you are talking to those you serve. And if they talk about their intimate life, and if that's an issue, I can almost guarantee, based on this last number of years of working with Dr. Mike, that if you raise this topic, it's going to resonate with a big chunk of people. And here's the reason. See this in this table. This is the percentage of couples, because one of our studies, one of our surveys was called a matched pair survey of married couples. So we didn't know who they were, but we knew that this husband and this wife were married to each other, right? We think, if you look at this chart, we think that where the husband is initiating and the wife is initiating, that's 100%, right? That's the Hollywood version of how sex works. In reality, it's only 10% of couples. 90% have a different pattern. This is so encouraging for people to realize, because often the person with receptive desire thinks they're broken. And the spouse of the person with receptive desire thinks they're broken, thinks the spouse is broken. And this actually shows, no, this is a physiological way that we appear to be created. Right.
The bulk of couples, the largest numbers you can see there is the husband being the initiator and the wife being receptive, which is, again, Christ reflective. As he says, I, the groom, stand at the door and knock. And if you will open the door and receive me, we will have a sensual feast together. So this is so rich. It's so much fun.
Yep. So do we want to talk about who has the highest desire level of desire, Dr. Mike?
Let's do that real quick.
Okay.
While you're pulling that up, though, I don't think we finished. Resistant desire is for a host of reasons.
Yes.
People have the brakes on, or they're even in reverse. And that may be due to woundedness in the past. It may be due to woundedness in the relationship, not viewing their spouse as safe, feeling the intense pressure to perform. It may be something that's going on physiologically for them. So often there's good reasons for that resistance. And many times a professional is needed to help them to problem solve that resistance. Because often there's a valuable reason for it, but that's not the receptive, I'm waiting, and I can be talked into it. It's truly a lockdown.
And by the way, at the end of this, I believe we have a slide at some point to refer people to a resource website that we created called secretsofsexandmarriage.com, where if your people need a referral to someone who can help with things like this, they can actually go through. If you need a referral help, there are some referral helps on that website. Okay, really briefly, one of the other things to mention is we talked about those desire types. There also is a reality of desire levels. And this is more sort of stereotypical, where you just assume that the husband is the one who has the highest desire. And as you can see, it's actually, yeah, barely. A little more than half of men are the ones with the higher desire. And yet there's a pretty big number of women who have the higher desire. And there's also a pretty big number of people who are happily equal.
Right. When we asked who's the higher desire, both husbands and wives overestimated, making the husband far more so, up in the almost to the 70% for husbands, and a much smaller group that believed that they had the same desire. But we asked what their desire was, remember, and because this was matched pair, we could take what the husband says he wanted and subtract the wife, and we get what we call a difference score, and that's that second graph there. And you can see that the majority of this huge number of them, not the majority, but this huge number is at zero. They're right the same. That might have been both wanted it once a month or both wanted it daily, but they were the same. And then if it's a positive number, the husband wanted it a bit more. If it's a negative number, the wife wanted it a bit more. So we could see. But the other thing to point out here is most couples weren't that far apart. They were 1 or 2 steps away from each other. And couples don't realize that. They often come in to see me, they're polarized, where one of them says they never want to have sex. But we are so far apart, and you start unpacking it and you realize they are really close to each other.
And that is so encouraging, by the way, that you will find if you start having these kinds of conversations with people with just a little of this data, it can be so helpful. If you add up, for example, that 54 and the 24%, that's 79% of couples who have this, in most cases, this simple pain of one spouse wanting more than the other, and probably feeling like they're alone, and that doesn't happen very often. And you can say, actually, that's 8 in 10 couples. You're in good company, and probably you're closer than you think you are. So let's figure out what's keeping you apart. So again, we don't have time to get into it in detail here, but that is one of those very encouraging, very simple things that you can do as you go.
Yep. We'll have it in the resources, but I have an entire streaming course that's available just on sexual desire because there's so much in this, and it's such a pain area for couples. The last one is, we went back and forth on the title for this, and I like what Shaunti came up with here of hacking your heart attitudes, because they're there are a couple of key heart attitudes that make a profound difference in a couple's intimate life, especially in sexuality, but also in money and parenting. We did those in chapter 7, 8, and 9 in the book. And the first one is that of curiosity. This is being curious both inside and outside of the bedroom. It's just that state of, I desire to know about you. And couples come in and they're often sitting in pain, and they're wanting their spouse to be different, and they move very much into a critical or in a commanding or some type of a stance that is not seductive and doesn't foster our ability to step in and to grow. And then they'll hear something like I mentioned the vision statement where she said, wait, what? Well, I've never heard that before. And I like to pause them right there and say, what do you feel? Well, I'm confused. And what are you doing with it? I'm asking questions. That curiosity is so rich in marriage. If you can get to where you live in a curious stance, I married this brilliant, beautiful individual. He is so strong and he is so competent. How in the world could he think the way he does? That's a curious stance. Now you're leaning in and saying, how do you think that way? What do you think? What are you thinking about me? And not be hurt and wounded by it, but truly curious. I am sending that message somehow. And we've watched such a profound shift as couples work on living in a curious stance towards each other, not demanding that you be who I want you to be. I'm curious about who God is calling you to be and who God is developing you to be in your discipleship. And I want to come alongside you and do this journey together and always be curious about who you are. It is so rich.
We call it a superpower.
Uh-huh.
Curiosity being a superpower. And there are two phrases that we have seen in our team and our research over the years that really kind of are helpful. So write these down. We didn't put this on the slide, but these are two examples. Instead of asking why are you thinking that way? Because that can be heard, especially, by the way, statistically by men, that can be heard as criticism, even if the wife doesn't feel it that way, it can be heard that way. And so the concept of help me understand, take me through that, help me understand that, if you suggest that to the average spouse as a phrase, that will help because it puts them in sort of that curious frame of mind. The second one that we discovered is especially helpful from a husband to a wife. It works for anybody, but from a husband to a wife, is to say, tell me more. Like, tell me more about this. Tell me more how you're feeling. Because this is like, every wife's dream that her husband would get in there and listen and ask questions. And so those two things are super simple, but that curiosity is that mindset that's being trained.
Right. Every wife's dream, as long as she knows he's curious. If she thinks he's teeing her up for criticism, then it's not a welcome question.
It doesn't work.
Yep. But the next one is acceptance and grace. And when I started my counseling career, I was developing a model of grace counseling and seeing that is such a huge shift from premarital and early married couples to couples who've been married for a number of years. Those pre-married couples, well, yeah, this is something that's not all that, but I find it kind of cute. And 20 years into the marriage, she no longer finds it cute. He needs to get rid of it, and it's intolerable. And I think where did the grace go? How do we get to where we can accept that?
The other piece of the puzzle there is not just grace, but acceptance. And one of the things that was really striking when Jeff and I first started working with Dr. Mike, and we would go to his office every Wednesday for like 3 or 4 hours and just ask him questions, and he would just download 35 years of experience to us. Jeff really enjoyed when people said, "What'd you do today?" "We went to see a sex therapist." Like, he had way too much fun with that. Anyway, but one of the things that came up very early was talking about this acceptance piece, where we were asking Dr. Mike, how is it that you can deal with some of these issues that are real issues, right? Like, it's not always that it's, you're not that far apart in your sexual frequency desires or whatever. There's sometimes bigger issues. How do you deal with that? And he paused for a minute and he said, one thing that most counselors know is that all counseling work is grief work. It's grieving what you don't have in order to accept it and to be able to make space mentally and emotionally for not just accepting it, but also actually appreciating what you do have. And all of that starts with grieving those things that you wish they were a bit different and they're not. And this obviously, this doesn't, we're not talking about abuse here, but we're talking about things like, I really wish my wife wanted sex every day. I really wish she did. Like, that's something I went into marriage expecting. And those kinds of things, that acceptance is a crucial piece of this, which
Right.
I'll let Dr. Mike explain because, he's the therapist.
No, but you're on target there to kind of flip the script. The wife who said, I just have this fantasy of my husband coming home, bursting through the door, sweeping me off my feet, carrying me up the stairs, throwing me on the bed, and just ravaging me. And she said, and I married this soft, tender, compassionate, gentle pastor who the thought of being aggressive with me is so offensive to him. He treats me with such tenderness and care. He cherishes my heart so much. And sometimes I wish he didn't. And her ability to grieve who he's not allows her to lean in and accept, I will never be married to somebody who does that just out of strength and out of this dominance that is a little bit sexy to me. She said, I will never be married to somebody like that. But that allows her, once she's grieved it, when she's truly let go of it, and we could spend a lot of time talking about what does it mean to truly grieve and what do we grieve and what do we not allow to grieve. There are some things that are not okay to grieve, and we address that in the book.
Yeah.
But when we can grieve it, we can truly accept who our spouse is, who God is calling our spouse to be, and come alongside them in a profound kind of a way.
And it matters for every issue in marriage. I mean, this webinar has been more focused on the physical intimacy side of things. The Unlocking an Intimate Marriage study is broader than that. And literally just 2-3 days ago, I was talking to a young woman who's getting married and is having to come to terms with the fact that she's probably always going to be the breadwinner in the family. That the young man that she's marrying, he's probably going to be a school teacher, and that's going to be an income differential that she's maybe not going to be able to be the stay-at-home mom that she had always assumed that she would be. And that's an example of coming to accept this is who she's marrying. And so that it works in so many different areas of our married life.
And grief work, I tell couples, I don't think we were designed to grieve. And Adam and Eve, I'm not sure that was designed to be part of the story. And so we brought that upon ourselves. And I think we grieve very poorly. We grieve very messily. And grief takes a long time. So grieving aspects of who our spouse is not is difficult discipleship. But when we are able to, it allows us to extend profound grace and deep acceptance. And now we truly have the spouse that we always desired to have. And
Yeah.
that is so rich to watch play out. So these hard attitudes, that of curiosity, acceptance, and grace, are profound in helping couples to really move into intimacy.
Yeah, truly a secret, like something that people don't realize matters, and it really matters. I know we need to get to the Q&A time. Before we do, let's just tell you just briefly again what these are based on, because I know some of you may have come in just a couple minutes late. We have a book and a small group study through RightNow Media. The book is Secrets of Sex in Marriage, and that is specifically about that sexual intimacy in marriage, which we all know is such a big deal in so many marriages. And also the Unlocking an Intimate Marriage study through RightNow Media, which we're super excited about. It's 8 sessions. You're going to see, by the way, just so you know, if you go to the RightNow Media page for Unlocking an Intimate Marriage, you're going to actually see what looks like this massive number of videos. Be aware, it's not actually exactly what it looks like. It's 8 sessions, but each of the 8 sessions has small, short videos to allow people to be able to have a discussion about a topic, and then to be able to go, you know what, this is kind of veering into territory that maybe it's time to move on to our next video. And our next teaching point. So each one of those has 4 small videos in it. Mike, did you want to say anything more about that before?
I was just really concerned that we do a teaching video and then ask the group to talk for 45 minutes, that somebody is going to stray into unsafe territory. Or if we do a 4-minute teaching video and then you discuss for 10 minutes, there's less chance of it getting off track. And as Shaunti says, if it starts to get off track, all anybody has to do is say, can we move to the next video? And the next teaching video pulls the group right back on track, back into safe territory. All of this is designed to make a intimate topic safer for a group to discuss. We've really thought long and hard on how to do this.
Yeah.
So we're ready for some questions. I'm curious to see what you've got, Brian.
I'm
awesome.
Very interested.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys sharing what you've shared, and there's just, I know, so many more layers to it than what we even got a chance to touch base on today. I guess one question would be, and you kind of touched on it with this idea of, all counseling work is really kind of grief work. I mean, a lot of this is expectations. So I guess talk, especially to the leaders here that are listening in today, they are ministering to, couples that are married or maybe couples that are headed towards marriage. How do you set proper expectations? Because I think that's where we do get a lot of our, frustration and disillusionment is the being off base on our expectations about each other, whether it's, in the intimacy side or just communication side or whatever. So I guess if you don't mind, speak a little bit to how do you set proper expectations in that relationship?
I don't know that we can set them as well as we like to think we can. A lot of premarital counseling is to help couples wrestle with their expectations and get them correctly. And my experience is most of us don't know what our expectations are until they're not met. And so that's a couple of years into marriage where we go, wait, you're not behaving the way I expected you to.
Yeah.
So for me, the key is how do we talk well about them? How do we address and say, I'm realizing I had this expectation in marriage. Can we talk about it? And it may be one of those things that, you expected me to keep the kitchen just as clean as you do, and I'm just not capable, but I will work on it. Let's talk about what a reasonable expectation in our marriage is. And then we both grieve a bit of what's not.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I think you're probably right. We place a lot more emphasis on what we think we can set, but we just have to discover them really in the process of that relationship.
And then address what's the vision for our marriage. You wanted this, I wanted that. What do we want to fight for together?
Yeah. What a great insight. We had a question come through, and you touched on this a little bit with the passage in Revelation, but the question is, how do you begin to reignite a relationship to build back towards greater intimacy? Imagine that person, like you said, that's kind of been in the relationship for a while. Maybe there's some, falling off of that intimacy. What would be some practical first things you would suggest to do to kind of reignite that intimacy?
Very much what we were talking about in the Remember, Repent, and Do. So if that couple's coming in to see me, and I realize this is the issue, they've kind of fallen out of the passion of love, I take them back to, so tell me about how you guys met. What was the first impression you had from each other? And I go back and I get them talking about those early stories. And there are a number of different materials out there that you can get through online sources that get you talking back about early relationship, and it reignites the memory of it. And then we're watching for what was the setting, what was the context that love grew in, and how do we go back and bring those things forward to do that Remember, Repent, and Do. The caveat to that is when damage has been brought in. So if somebody hasn't upheld their marital vows, or if somebody is truly intentionally not met expectations, we have to do some cleanup and do some healing. That's a different level of grief work that still needs to be worked through. So there can be a grief of what wasn't, and can we still have a vision that we agree on and fight for that? There can be lots of setbacks, and I'm a Georgia bulldogs. So, there can be lots of setbacks in a team. But when we believe in the vision of where they're going, we can get right back on track and fight for it. And it can be fun again. And it's not all that different in a marital relationship. If they're expecting the early passion of marriage, that's probably not going to happen. That's a biochemical thing, PEA, phenylaldehyde, that floats around early in the system. It tends to fade off, that crush-like feeling, and it becomes a rich relationship. These marriages that I work with that have been married for 50 years. One of my friends just said, marriage at this stage is so sweet. I would not give up the fight we had to get here for anything. So much better than that early newlywed kind of love.
Well, one of the things that we heard a lot in the research, and this goes back into some of the research that Jeff and I have done over the years as well, is that one of the premises, I guess, that a lot of couples get to when they've developed a happy and healthy marriage is they treat each other first and foremost like best friends, honestly. And that, again, what I was saying earlier is some of that is built just by spending time together. There was a study that was done a number of years ago that found that the number one predictor of friendship isn't what you think it is. It isn't like shared values or similar interests or similar temperaments. Like, all of those are actually important for friendship, but the primary predictor of friendship is geographic proximity. You're best friends with the people you see the most often, spend the most time with. We all know that, right? Because we've all had friends we've moved away or they've moved away, and you love each other, but you're just not as intimate. And it works the same way in marriage. And so that can be for many couples, not all, that can be a one simple solution.
No, I think it's huge. But I want to pick on one of the things you said there, like best friends. Well, a difference I see in best friends versus spouses often is our best friends we extend a lot of grace to. We are curious about. We don't demand that they be like me. My spouse, I demand that they be like me. And that's where it starts to go wrong. Rather than be curious about who God is calling them to be and who he's developing them to be, I demand that they be who I want them to be, and that mucks it all up. And I think you're spot on, Shaunti. Allowing them to be more like a best friend, where I come alongside them and we have this vision together, versus I need to make you into who I want you to be. That gets icky.
Speaking of making you who I want you to be, I noticed, Brian, if you're okay, that we've gotten several questions on, can you explain that receptive desire thing again?
Yeah, and I think that's a good one here in these last few moments to kind of help, because there was definitely a couple of questions that came through. Yeah, what does that
People
really
are like,
like?
what?
My husband feels hurt because I don't initiate. So then what is that? Yeah. So can you help with that and get a little bit more?
Yeah, I would tell the husband that's called normal. And he may need to grieve that is normal for her. And when he approaches her and says, can we, and she goes into this thinking mode of, well, can we?
Let me finish the report first.
Yeah, if she comes back with maybe, rather than him be hurt that she didn't have an initiating desire, that it's challenge accepted. I can draw you into this. And because I know that 5 to 10 minutes into this process, desire is going to turn on for you. And that's normal for you. That's so important.
I think one of the things in order to really quickly answer that question, but also to refer you to that chapter in the book. Honestly, that sounds like a commercial, but honestly, there is a reason why we put this in an early chapter in Secrets of Sex and Marriage. And in Unlocking an Intimate Marriage, by the way, there's a whole session just on this topic, because that receptive desire, which is 73% of women, okay, 73%. And what was it, 38% of men?
38% of men.
I think, yeah. And so the receptive desire, just to say what it is again, since people were saying, explain this, what it is basically the physiology appears to work almost in the reverse order, where instead of feeling that desire and doing something about it, you make a decision. That person makes a decision to get engaged with their spouse. And then they start getting aroused, and then it starts stimulating, and assuming that they see that as positive, and that keeps going in that way, then they may start feeling the desire that their spouse felt 10 minutes ago. And
Or that morning.
Or that morning.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so just for the average person who is married to a receptive desire spouse, one of the things we say is this explains one of those things that has confused a lot of people, especially husbands, over the years, where she needs to feel close outside the bedroom in order to want to be close inside the bedroom. Quite often, it's because she is making a decision to engage with you based on how she feels about you and the relationship the rest of the day.
And
And
that's
that is
normal.
life-changing for people once they realize it.
And if we reverse that, the wife who thinks all men have that strong initiating desire, his body may be wired for a receptive type of desire that's so confusing to her. And she may think something's broken and wrong in him, or something's wrong in her, or he doesn't love her, or doesn't find her attractive. And sometimes that's the case, but more often than not, he's just wired a little bit different than what both of them have been taught by culture should be.
Well, again, I know we've just scratched the surface on this. I appreciate all the time and work and passion you guys have both put into the counseling and the teaching and the creation of resources to help the church with this, to help individuals and couples with this. Yeah, grateful for you today. We're not going to be able to get to all the questions that came in, but in a moment, Nikki's going to come on and tell folks how to learn more about these resources and even get in touch with you guys through websites and other means. So thank you guys for sharing with us today and for, again, the passion and work you put into it. We're really grateful for it.
Thanks for the opportunity and for everybody who's signed up to do this.
Yeah. Well, Nikki, come on and tell folks kind of where they can learn more so they can dig into this deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. First, Shaunti and Michael, just thank you so much for your time today and your insight. I hope our audience gained just a fresh perspective and some valuable insights. I know some of us were taking notes and really going through the slides, so really appreciate everything that you shared here today. Excuse me. As mentioned, Shaunti has authored several books, many of which have a corresponding RightNow Media video study. Today's webinar content is based on the book that Shaunti and Michael wrote together, which is Secrets of Sex and Marriage, which has a corresponding small group workbook and RightNow Media video study titled Unlocking an Intimate Marriage. Other books with accompanying RightNow Media video series include Thriving in Love and Money, The Kindness Challenge, and For Women Only, For Men Only, and For Couples Only. If your organization is already a RightNow Media subscriber, you and everyone in your ministry can watch these video series today in the RightNow Media app to hear more from Shaunti and Dr. Sytsma. You can also connect more with our speakers at intimatemarriage.org and shaunti.com for additional resources and next steps. Plus, you can find them on most major social media platforms. And if you're not yet a RightNow Media subscriber, we'd love to see how we can come alongside you to be part of your discipleship and small group strategy. With thousands of video series taught by trusted pastors and Christian leaders like Shaunti and Dr. Sytsma, the RightNow Media library is full of high-quality, accessible biblical content, from books of the Bible to leadership development studies to marriage and parenting series and safe content for kids. Schedule a free in-depth demo today at rightnowmedia.org/get access, and our team can walk through the platform and learn more about your ministry's specific needs. And with that, we'd like to thank you all for attending today's webinar. Have a great day.